Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the November 8th meeting of the Conestoga Valley School Board. Notice that all are in attendance, with the exception of Ms. Whitaker. If you could all please join me with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, again, welcome everyone to our meeting. Board, I need a motion to approve our agenda tonight.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Any board comments tonight? All right, Dr. Z, superintendent comments.
Thank you, Mr. President. Even though we do have another meeting this month, I'd like to take this time to thank the current board members who are completing their outstanding voluntary service to the students at CV. Todd Schertzer, Dr. Dana Mead, Dr. Keisha Morant-Williams, Lisa Whitaker, and Diana Rodriguez have each made an indelible mark on the district with their dedicated service to the entire CV community. Thank you once again to each of you for making a positive difference in the lives of our CV children. I'd also like to welcome our newest elected board members who will be taking the oath of office during our first board meeting in December, and that will be on Monday, December 6th at 7 o'clock. Right here in the district office. Congratulations and welcome to Diana Kapka in the back there. Kathy Trowbridge sitting right here up front, and Phil Hurst as they accept the responsibility to provide governance to the district, ensuring that we continue to create supportive learning opportunities for every child every day so that each child is successful in whatever future they choose. So on behalf of the administrative team and the entire school district, again, welcome. We look forward to working with you now and in the years to come. And it seems like no meeting is complete without a COVID announcement. Today, Governor Wolf made the announcement that the wearing of masks will be going back to local control on January 17th. PDE followed up with a general announcement with more details to follow within the coming weeks. We will continue to report out as new information becomes available. I do have the link for the governor's press release, and Katie, I'll be getting that to you, so you can just post my comments, and it's within the comments. That's it for tonight, Mr. President. Thank you.
All right. This is the time in our meeting for, first time in our meeting for public comments. Any comments from the public tonight? All right. With that, we will move on in our agenda. Phyllis, you are first up.
I am. All right, first item I have for you on the agenda is a memorandum of understanding with Upper Laycock Township. As you know, as we've showed you the PlanCon documents to go to the next phase of projects, which would be the existing middle school in Leola. Leola obviously sitting in Upper Laycock Township, so we're already starting to work through processes with them as far as what the project's gonna look like. We have done a cursory review with them, but we will be now starting to show up to their board meetings and start walk the board through the project. And with that, you know, there's some applications and things obviously that we have to fill out and sign. And as you can see, this memorandum of understanding, which really lays out the financial security that goes along in their subdivision and land ordinance. And so, you know, we put it for you tonight in case you have any questions. The next person on the agenda is actually Mark Karowski at K&W. So if you have questions for either one of us, we can try to answer them on this. But looking for you to approve this as part of consent next week, which would be prior to, it's the week of Thanksgiving actually, that will be at their meeting. So.
Any questions, board? All right.
If not, then Mark's next.
Hey, Mark, welcome.
Good evening, folks. I believe the item that we have on the agenda this evening is an additional service authorization for our contract on the Leola project, kind of segueing from Phyllis's description. There are two kind of process items that we have to walk through Upper Laycock Township that were not contemplated when we were kind of during the sketch plan phase. They're nominal, but they're required. So one is a zoning relief that is specifically associated with parking islands that are required in the parking lot. And then secondly, it's a process that they call minor land disturbance. If you're familiar, like when we went through the middle school, we have a land development plan is typically kind of like the bigger, more robust process. The minor land development is still a process through the township, requires public meetings, plan presentations, some waiver requests, but it's a little more consolidated than a full-blown land development. So the request that you have before you this evening is to approve that additional services request in the total amount of $10,690 for us to walk both of those processes through the township. Happy to answer any questions on the request, or if you should have any questions about the project itself.
No? All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
That was easy.
Those will go on consent.
That's right. They'll both be on the consent, correct?
Yep.
All right. Mr. Hogan, I believe it is your turn.
I think I got the presentation. Yes, there we go. So I'm going to give the presentation tonight, June 30, 2021 Audit Report. Before I get started here, before we even go through these numbers, if everybody remembers, when you were going through the process of going through the budget process or going into 2021, nobody knew what 2021 was going to look like. I think what everybody thought 2021 was going to look like when going through the budget process, it didn't look like that in any way, shape, or form. I think things were always evolving. But that being said, a lot of the expectations of lower than anticipated revenues and bad financial negative impact to the district, they were all not seen across the board in all the school districts across the state, and we'll see that here tonight in terms of the results here. So that being said, I'm just going to go to the first. So this is the pages 1 and 2 of your auditor's report, and this is the same audit report that you've been getting every year. They've been coming here, except with a little caveat this year. The school district implemented a new GASB related to its fiduciary funds or student activities. About as exciting as it gets. So there's an extra paragraph in the audit report for the current year describing the change that was made. So basically what happened was the biggest change was there's elementary school student activity accounts, and we just changed the reporting of those from a fiduciary fund to more of a special revenue fund. Basically, saying that the elementary school kids don't have fiduciary responsibilities or can't make financial decisions on their own. We just kind of changed the reporting of that. So, and then with some other changes, et cetera, related to it. But that was implemented in the current year. Next slide. So here's what I was talking about before. This is like a real synopsis of what's actually on page number 55. So if anybody wants to look at page 55, and page 55 kind of blows this out between the different types of revenues and expenditures by function. And you can kind of see things more, more detailed for 2020, 2021. So as you can see up at the top, revenues were budgeted at $72.5 million. They came in at $75 million. Couple reasons here. If you look at that page back on page 55, when you went into the budget process, like we just talked about, you were super conservative with your local source revenues. You didn't really get aggressive with your earned income taxes. You might have even cut them back a little bit with anticipation. Realty transfer taxes, everything was really conservative just because of all the unknowns with COVID-19. In addition, if you look there, your federal source revenues are over budget as well because you received some of that COVID stimulus relief money that wasn't in the original budget. So when you take the combination of those two, you were $2.6 million more to the good in relation to your revenue. Now your expenditures were budgeted at $67 million, almost $70 million. They came in at, or $68 million. They came in at $69 million, and this is kind of twofold. One of the biggest over expenditures was your cyber school expenditures for the year, number one. And then number two, those federal source revenues that we just talked about, you got the money in, and there's expenditures that are associated with those federal awards. So it's kind of offset. So you had the revenue that came in for the federal awards, and then you have the expenditures to offset it down below. So it's kind of twofold there. So when you went through the process of the budget of last year, you budgeted to use $1.3 million. You actually held the line, had a little bit of an increase in your fund balance there. And then you had a 1 point, so that was a positive, effect of what you budget, what actually came in at 1.6. So at the end of the day, your fund balance was 15.5. You had a 15.7 at the end of the year. Next slide. So here's that 15.7, and then this is kind of if you look at page number 19, if anybody wants to follow along. So this is basically the excess of the assets over the liabilities at your end, or that 15.7 of your fund balance. And in accordance with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, you can only have unassigned fund balance of 8% of the next year's expenditure budget. So in order to get to there, you have to set aside money for one-time non-recurring expenditures. So in the case of Conestoga Valley, you committed amounts for, the retirement rate stabilization. We'll kind of go over that in a little bit. Things have kind of leveled out, which is good. Your health savings accounts, future debt service obligations, an amount to balance future budgets. If you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, you had a bond refunding. You put that money aside, in case you had a hole in your budget and you could use that. And then you had the COVID-19 related expenditures. So if you remember in the previous year, that number was closer up to about, I want to say it was over $2 million or close to $2 million at the end of the year. Yeah, it was $2.1 million. So in the budget process, you used $500,000. And the idea is over the next couple of years to draw down upon that to help with those related expenditures, to offset them. And then given the nature of the school district, you put money aside too for tax assessment appeals and TIFs. So once we take all those assignments, those commitments in there, it gets you down to the $6.1 million, and that puts you within the 8% of the next year's expenditure budget. All right, the next slide. So we spent over the past couple of years, we've obviously been spending a lot of time in the capital projects fund related to not only the new middle school, but Brownstown Elementary and other ongoing projects with the school district, but obviously the biggest one being the middle school. The capital projects fund is made of two funds: your capital reserve fund, which is basically transfers or over from the general fund from time to time for future capital projects, so you don't have to go out and borrow debt. And then you have your capital projects fund, which is the actual debt that's actually issued. So as you can see over in the capital projects fund, where all the activities happening, $31 million of expenditures in the current year, other financing sources, uses in the current year. Number one, to finance the mostly the middle school in the current year, to terminate the interest rate swap, and then also to there was a bond premium associated with that gave you extra proceeds. So at the end of the day, when you take the ins and the outs, you went to 16.7. At the end of the year, you had $48.9 million, to finish projects and for future projects that you guys are going to have down the line. Next slide. Here's the PSERS net pension liability. This is starting to become a little bit, as you can see, it's still increasing quite a bit. I think you've even had this, back in the day, like in 2008, 2009, when I would show that on the side, that percentage was 4%, and the rate increase was, really a lot, from 4% to 25% like that. But now it's kind of leveled off. I'm sure everybody's aware.
It's leveled off way up here.
Yeah. Well, it's leveled off, and intuitively, you keep on thinking, well, the market's doing great, it should be going down. But, I think internally, PSERS has its own issues right now going on with it. I think, around 2027, 2028, it's about 38%. So hopefully, things, level off at the 38% and start turning back, or peak, and then kind of come back down the other way in terms of, related to these percentages. So, and then the next slide. So this is the final slide, basically in our findings. There's no issues in terms of, just as in the previous years, as you're all aware, you can tell by the financial reporting received by the board on a monthly basis, there's no issues, no journal entries, material journal entries, other than those that come up during the course of our audit that need to be booked. there's no need for any kind of internal control letter, any internal control deficiencies. And as part of our audit, we also do a single audit related to your federal awards. This year that we added test 2 programs. Typically we're testing 1 program, but because of the size and nature of some of this COVID money, we had to test not only IDA, which is special education, but also we tested the Education Stabilization Fund, the ESSER funds, 1 and 2. So I anticipate going forward, we're going to be testing ESSER again, especially with the large amounts coming in for ESSER 3 in the upcoming years. So then also there's various reporting deadlines that need to be met. October 31st, the annual financial report, PDE, EMA will get posted by December 27th. And then the single audit will get filed well ahead of the March 31st deadline. So, I mean, there's a lot of information in this audit report, and encourage everybody to look, et cetera. But, overall, the district's in a good place.
Thank you, sir.
Always good to hear.
Good job, Phyllis and your team. It's kudos to you as well, so thank you for that hard work. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Carl. All right, I'm back. So I've said before, if you don't want to read all 80 pages of it, the very front of that report has about 12 or 13 pages. It's called the Management Discussion and Analysis. And if you don't want to read all of those pages, page 3 gives you some financial highlights. And then closer to the end, I think it's 12 or 13, kind of give you the budget highlights. So those 2 pages, really neatly bulleted items, kind of hit the highlights of what the financials look like for the year. So, all right. So I think I have the next 2 items on the agenda, first of which is the delinquent tax update. You all have seen this presentation before, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but just to kind of hit the highlights. Slide 2 just gives you the difference between the municipal claims and tax liens law and the real estate tax sale law. So you remember that from when we engaged with Portnoy a number of years ago. But the next slide, so, to be very honest, we don't have huge delinquencies as a percentage-wise in our collections, but this is all about cash flow to us. So instead of having the county do this for us and those cash flows coming to us a year, 2, 3 years later, what we're trying to do with this arrangement with Portnoy is have those cash flows come in much more quickly. And you can see this chart is the line graph. The one behind it gives you the actual numbers. So depending on which way you like to see it, but you can see even through the COVID years. Now, certainly we had that upswing and then sort of a drop off. And then another upswing later in the year in 2020, and a lot of that was due to some delayed deadlines as a result of COVID. And then this year for 2021, seeing a line that looks much similar to the lines in 2019 and 2018. And then the very last slide in this presentation just walks you again, and those are the numbers behind it, so you can look at it that way. The very last one then just is a reminder of the steps that Portnoy goes through with each taxpayer should they go into this process. And they do find very early on when they send their original letter out and they offer folks hardship and they can put them on a payment plan, they get many of them taken care of that way. But I just repeat it because I think it's good for you just to remember that it's not a once and done thing, that they are reaching out multiple times throughout the process. So attached to your agenda is the addendum that you've seen from Portnoy for the last couple of years. It's just adding another year to it. So that'll be on consent for your approval next week. And then I think the next item should be the policies. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right.
We're getting there.
Okay.
Mine's running slow. Yeah, also running really slow.
So while that's sort of warming up, I kind of do the spoiler alert here. If you noticed, most of the changes to the 4 policies that we put in front of you come from sort of one of 2 avenues. Either a place where things are already in code, As a matter of fact, this first policy is a great example of where we've repeated something. The problem with it is what we've repeated that's in code has dollar numbers in it, and those dollar numbers change. So literally each year our policy is going to be out of compliance. So trying to clean some of that language up and reference back to a more generic approach, or reference back to the school code to kind of take some of that away, so we're not having our policies be out of compliance. And then another place another item that we're trying to do is not have all of the procedures, the detailed of what really should be in a policy handbook, into the policy. So you'll see as I go through each of these, there are certain areas where we took some really detailed stuff that's literally like, we're going to do this step and then that step, and taking it out of the policies, it will then go into the procedural guidelines instead of being in the policy. Okay, so now that
Before you get, that's one thing I had picked up, that you got rid of all those procedures. When you say in the procedure guideline, where is that?
So we engaged with the School Boards Association to put Dr. Z, administrative regulations document together. And so it'll kind of marry with the policy, but not be in the policy.
Okay. I would just like to see mention in a policy that document exists.
Okay.
And if somebody wants to know how it's done. My last question would be, I assume this varies from school board to school board, some of the specific processes they go through, the procedure, and that is developed and done between you and superintendent, am I right? I mean, who decides
The
what?
procedures on how to do the competitive bids, yes.
Yeah, okay. But I think it helps if somebody's looking for something in our policies that we felt was just overwhelming, that they know where to find it.
To go
if it
for it.
exists.
Yep. So in the very first one, as I mentioned, this had referred to the competitive bid guidelines, which have three different buckets: a bucket where you don't have to bid, a bucket where you need to get quotes, and then a bucket where you have to get actual bids. And so again, that language was something that was referencing specific dollar amounts, and so we actually took language from another sample policy and exchanged that out to, so we wouldn't get stuck in that. Did some deletions here where, again, things like professional services that it's already codified, that those types of things don't go through a competitive bid process, or emergency situations. There's a whole specific process at PDE for those. We've actually been through it a couple of times with some of the building issues we've had, so deleted those because they're repeats. And then here's in the specification section where I was referring to, we go through very specific items, not to use the word, but where we're laying out exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to eliminate or exclude, and it's too detailed for a policy. I think we say what we're going to do as far as bidding services and not have to go into that level of detail. And then when we compared our policy to other policies from other districts, found that ours was the only one that included it of the group that we looked at. So it's sort of good validation for us that all of that didn't need to be in there. Some of the other more generic titles, the invitation to bid, the bonds, how we do the opening, we kept them, but they're small sections. They don't go through, specific details on those. And then I think down at the very end is where we have the quotes, which is the other piece of those buckets. And again, change that language there instead of going to the 10,500 to reference what we did in the beginning. And then the delegation of responsibility, which we've been trying to be consistent about that language across all the policies and use the same reference. So that's the first one, bidding of products and services. The next one is the purchasing policy, and here again, you're going to see a similar scenario where there were some things that were very specific that we deleted from the policy. We did actually change a little bit on the guidelines, some language. The very last bullet there, the no purchase request, was in our old policy. It was just in a different spot up above. But took the guidelines from one of the other samples that we looked at about standardization, which again was at the end of our policy. And then Dr. Z, if you scroll down a little bit, you're gonna see leasing, state contracts, sales tax, some items that we're recommending deletion from the policy, again, because it's either really specific, it doesn't apply. In the case of the sales tax, when I get to one of the upcoming policies, you're gonna see that exact same language. So we didn't feel like it was necessary to have it in both policies. One policy is fine. And then again, the administrative guidelines at the end of that policy. The next one should be payroll authorization. So we skip a little bit here from payments over to payroll, and then we'll come back to payment of bills. So in the payroll authorization, of all 4 policies that we're presenting to you tonight, this one is the one that had the most level of detail in it. And so if you look, actually scroll down, yep, there we go, scroll down a little bit there. You're gonna see we go in and really define how many installments, and some of this actually is not even accurate. So we have changed, in conjunction with the union, the pay periods. We actually have 3 different types of pay periods depending on the type of employee you are. But so some of this detail, again, either isn't consistent, or it has changed, or is way more detail than we need for this policy. Same with some of the deductions and how we record time and payment methods. Just items that really needed to be updated from the last time. So we did try to keep some, again, some very generic language. So when we wanted to mention that there are payroll deductions, how the extra pay occurs, what the payment method is, just not to the level of detail that we had in the existing policy.
May I ask, the employee manual, does that get updated to reflect what is accurate? Do we do that regularly?
So we should do it regularly. Our intent is to do it regularly. Obviously, as you know, we've had a couple of different people in the HR department. So we had just gotten to a point where we had a first draft of revisions we have 2 handbooks actually. We have a professional and a support. And it just gotten to the point where we had gone through and kind of made edits. It never had been released because we didn't go through the finalization of it. And then, of course, Maribel is now with us and is actually, so that's one of the things she's tasked with this year, is finalizing that.
That's probably the people most interested in this particular aspect.
And it's interesting because when you compare the 2 of them, I mean, we had 2 handbooks for a specific reason, because there are pieces that are different depending on the type of employee you are, but there are major sections of those handbooks that are the same. So we're actually, looking at maybe we just combine it all into one with 2 sections. And so the generic sections would be the same for both, and then the specific sections would call out the differences between the different types of staff. So that may be a way to get it all in one document and clean it up. But yes, that is on her list for this year to finish.
So if it's not done, it will be.
Yes.
And the other thing was, I had a question on the tip of my tongue and then I lost it. How much of this is based on what happens with the collective bargaining contract? Does that affect us at all?
Not really.
That's completely up to us how to handle it.
The extra pay is part of the bargaining unit contract, but just payroll deductions and how we deal with overtime and recording time. I mean, those are sort of federal laws that, we have to, for federal regulations that we have to follow about how we do those things. And some of this is just old. I mean, one of the things that the very last item talks about, pre-numbered and entered checks, and we don't do checks anymore. We do direct deposit. But yes, if it needed to tie back to the bargaining unit contract, it would, but this is generic enough that there aren't a lot of areas where it does. And then the last one is, again, kind of back to payment of bills. And so we just tried to clean this one up a little bit. Again, some things that are listed on here, if we could scroll down just a little bit, that we don't do anymore. We don't have signature plates anymore. The signatures that get registered with the Commonwealth it's not a facsimile signature, it's just a signature that needs to be registered. So a couple of things like that. We did then down a little bit further where it talks about the board report that you get, just there wasn't any language in there, what the old, whoops, come back up a little bit, there we go, the old 340 that actually delineated what we give you on the check report. So we detailed its number, date, payee, amount, those sorts of things. And then down at the bottom of the policy, so again, there's where you see the sales tax information, so that one's in this policy. And then when you get down to the bottom, I'm not quite sure what we meant by accounting procedure, but we changed that to chart of accounts. Because that's what the document that we follow from the Department of Education is called, is actually the chart of accounts. So hopefully, a couple of these ones are ones that we hadn't updated in a while, so they took a little bit more work to get cleaned up and titles changed and all those sorts of things. So apologize for all the green and red, it looked a little like a Christmas tree, but tried to make sure we caught everything. Any questions on any of those? If not, you'll get them for first reading next week. Okay.
Come on down.
Good evening. Okay. The next item is the ELA curriculum and resource selection technical assistance. So last month, I shared with the board our plan for the science curriculum and resource upgrade. This is the work now we'll be doing around the K-8 ELA. So as we shared last month, we know our math, our ELA, and our science are all in need right now of that upgrade. And so this is the opportunity with our ESSER funding to make those shifts and get our core resources in place under that multi-tiered system of support and work through the curriculum process. And so what you're looking at is the IU13, they will be playing a really significant role in keeping this process moving. They are the experts in this area, so we're looking forward to working with them to help run those different resources through the district's priorities, through the comprehensive plan, to make sure that we have the opportunity to involve our stakeholders in the resource selection. So this is their technical assistance training. They'll be working with our administrative team and then also a team of teachers from K-8 to develop that plan.
Awesome. Questions, board? All right.
Thanks, Jill.
Thank you.
Up and down, up and down, up and down.
So I should have organized this so all my stuff was together, right? And nobody to blame but myself. All right, so 2 quick update items for you. As I'm sure some of you know, our recent experience with some of the Life Touch picture packages hasn't been as stellar as we would like, specifically in the sports and extracurricular areas. And so in conjunction, I've been talking to Mr. Frankhauser, working with Dina Henry in the athletic department. And we are going to send a notice to Life Touch. So the Life Touch agreement that we currently have has both in it that both parties need to agree to any change or cancellation of the agreement, which doesn't end until 2023. And it also has an exclusivity clause in it. So we need to kind of step through those 2 pieces. So we are going to send them a notice to document the issues that we have been having. So Dina is working on drafting that up. We will get that out, and our anticipation would be that they would basically agree to release us from that and allow us to find another provider that would provide the services, at least for the extracurricular and sports packages. And then certainly, we can look at all the rest of it, or if we have more issues, we can step through that. But been in touch with Bob about that, and that was his recommendation. So just so you know, because I know there's been a number of comments about those packages. And then the last item on the agenda, the letter is not attached because we are still working out which party it is going to be. I have a call with Mr. Frankhauser tomorrow on this subject. But essentially, we have been going through a process. I mean, you've heard at each board meeting when Fred comes and talks about the new middle school that they're, 4 months behind, 5 months behind, 4 months behind, 5 months behind. And we have been trying to work in between that to get the schedule kind of back to where it needs to be, and not been successful at that through a variety of different attempts. And so we have finally issued to the general contractor a letter to put them on notice that there was a hard date for that to happen. The date came and went, and we're still not where we need to be. And when we gave them that date, we said if we don't meet this date, that what they should anticipate from us is coming back with a third party to actually clean up the schedule for them. And my understanding is typically the way that works is so the board would approve the agreement with this third party. We would actually pay for that service. And then once they deliver it and we take it back to the contractors, and we would back bill them for the cost. So we would pay it, but the deal would be that we would be able to work it out in a reconciliation with them on the back end. So I would anticipate that next week, pending how this call goes tomorrow, that there will be a letter attached to the agreement, or attached to the agenda, with a cost associated with it. And so you all know kind of what is going to happen, but that the cost then will get charged back. Any questions on either of those?
Is it 150 days behind yet? Is that where we're still at?
Yes. It's ebbed and flowed, but it hasn't markedly improved.
And that letter will state then that we pay it up front, but they have to pay us back, correct? That's what that letter is going to state next week.
I will ask Mr. Frankhauser if it actually, I haven't seen it yet, so I can't answer that, but if it's not clear, I will ask him about that. But my understanding is in practice, that is typically how it works.
Yeah. And no contractor wants to get put on notice, so they are getting put on notice. It's not a grandiose thing for them, so.
Right. So,
Okay. Thank you, Phyllis.
okay, you're welcome.
Excuse me.
All right, board, you see the tentative agenda for next week. Reminder that we start with our Esther's Community Forum over at Brownstown.
Yep.
With the tour of Brownstown, and then the required forum for Esther's that we need to do. Okay, so this is the time in our meeting this is our second time in our meeting for public comments. Any comments from the public? All right, any board matters tonight? Hearing none, you see on your agenda the nominating team. I have asked Dana to head up the nominating committee for next year's officers. So she has graciously accepted to do that. So thank you, Dana. And with that, board, I will take a motion to adjourn to executive session for legal and personnel reasons.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?